She was 84 years old, a mother, a grandmother, the woman who shaped one of the most familiar voices in American broadcasting. And right now, according to federal investigators, they have a very clear picture of who is responsible for what happened to her. But here is the part that nobody anticipated. The phone call that unraveled this entire case did not come from a ransom demand. It did not come from a criminal. It came from inside the family itself. At 2:13 in the morning, while a nation held its breath, while television cameras stood vigil outside a home in Tucson, while her own son-in-law stood before those same cameras wiping tears from his face and swearing he would do anything to bring her home, a single encrypted phone placed a call, 7 minutes long. And according to federal investigators, what took place in those 7 minutes set into motion a series of events that the person who made that call never once believed would be traced back to them. Because within hours, $5 million began to move. Not cleanly, not directly, not in any way that looked like a normal transaction. 3 separate transfers. 3 separate destinations. Shell corporations most people have never heard of. 2.1 million. 1.7 million. 1.2 million. All of it tethered to a single name. And that name was not the Kidnappers. Before you form any opinion about what this means, you need to hear everything the FBI has uncovered, because what you think you know about this case is about to be turned completely on its head. Stay with me, because the detail that surfaces at the end of this story blindsided even the investigators working it. Welcome back to Cold Case History. I am going to walk you through every detail of this case, the footage, the forensics, the suspect behavior, the DNA, and the digital evidence trail. If you are new here, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We cover every update on cases like this one the moment they break. And trust me, this one is not finished breaking yet. Let's begin at the beginning. Here is what nobody initially noticed. That encrypted phone, the one that made the 2:13 a.m. call, had been completely dark for months before the abduction. No calls, no messages, no activity whatsoever, until exactly 1 week before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. And when federal agents traced where that phone was first switched on after all those silent months, they did not find a random street corner. They did not find a hotel lobby. They found a private executive airport lounge. The very same lounge used by the son-in-law in the week before he flew to Zurich for what he publicly described as investor meetings. Zurich, the city where 2 of the 3 shell companies that received the $5 million were officially registered. Sit with that for a moment. Because we are not in the territory of coincidence anymore. We are looking at a timeline. And timelines do not bend. Now before we go any further, I want to make sure you understand who this woman is. Nancy Guthrie is not a name on a wire report. She is not a statistic. She is a real person, a real mother. The woman who raised Savannah Guthrie, the beloved co-host of NBC's Today Show. The same Savannah Guthrie who has sat across from presidents and world leaders. The same woman whose voice has guided millions of Americans through some of the most difficult mornings of this century. That is whose mother we are talking about. Nancy was living quietly in Tucson, Arizona. No controversy, no spotlight, no reason for anyone to want to harm her. Just a woman living the peaceful later chapter of her life in a home she knew and loved. And then one ordinary morning, she was simply gone. 17 days followed. 17 days of no answers. 17 days of her daughter appearing on national television, visibly trying to keep herself together. 17 days of investigators chasing leads that evaporated before they could be confirmed. 17 days of a family not knowing if the woman they loved was even still breathing. The Pima County Sheriff's Department threw everything they had at this case. They ran DNA profiles through a national database containing more than 22 million samples. They analyzed clothing fibers. They tracked vehicles. They processed tips flooding in from across the country. And then the whole thing cracked open. Not from forensics. Not from a tip line call. From a phone call made in the dead of night. A 7-minute call that the person who placed it never imagined would surface. Think about the kind of late this was. The kind where decent people are asleep. The kind where only 2 categories of people are still awake. Those consumed by grief, and those concealing something. At 2:13 in the morning, while evidence was still being processed, while supporters held candlelight vigils, while reporters filed every development they could find, someone picked up a phone most people did not know existed. An encrypted device. Private. Built specifically so that certain conversations leave no trace for the average investigator to find. And that phone made a 7-minute call. 7 minutes sounds brief. 7 minutes is the length of a commercial break. The time it takes to brew a pot of coffee. But in those 7 minutes, according to federal investigators, someone moved $5 million and either arranged or coordinated a kidnapping. And here is what made that audio so deeply disturbing. When federal agents enhanced the recording of that call, what they heard was not desperation. What they heard was not someone frantic and terrified. What they heard was composure. Deliberate, measured, controlled. And one sentence rose above everything else on that recording. Move it now. No delays. Move it now. No delays. 4 words. Then 4 more. And those 8 words fundamentally redirected this entire investigation. Because those are not the words of a family member scrambling to ransom someone they love. Those are not the words of someone in tears begging for a safe return. Those are instructions. And according to federal investigators, those instructions triggered the movement of $5 million within the hour. Now let us talk about where that money actually went, because this is where the architecture of this case reveals itself. At 2:21 in the morning, 8 minutes after that call concluded, financial records show $5 million began moving. Not as a single wire. Not directly. 3 pieces. 2.1 million, 1.7 million, 1.2 million. 3 separate amounts routed through 3 shell corporations. Companies that technically exist but conduct very little traceable business activity. Companies designed to absorb and redistribute money without leaving obvious fingerprints. And investigators say every one of those 3 corporations was connected to a consulting arm linked to the son-in-law's international financial holdings. I want to be careful here, and I want to be fair. Holding complex financial structures is not by itself criminal. Wealthy executives use layered business entities all the time for legitimate purposes. But what investigators say they cannot explain away is the clock. Why would a man publicly presenting himself as a devastated family member move $5 million through 3 shell companies 8 minutes after a secret phone call in the middle of the night, while his mother-in-law was still missing? That is not routine corporate maintenance. That is not a scheduled transaction. That is a timeline. And when reporters pressed him about the transfers the following morning, his very first response was not confusion. It was not a request to understand what they were referring to. His words were, "That audio is manipulated. It is completely fake." But he did not deny the transfers. He confirmed the money had moved. He just labeled it routine restructuring. Routine restructuring. At 2:21 in the morning, the same night ransom instructions had been received. I will let you sit with that. Then came a moment that nobody inside the investigation anticipated. At 11:47 one Tuesday evening, an anonymous account uploaded a 43-second audio clip online. No warning. No context. No explanation. Just a short caption reading. "This is the 2:13 a.m. call." For about 12 minutes, nothing happened. The clip sat there barely noticed. And then someone enhanced the audio, and the internet erupted. The first voice on that enhanced recording was calm. Controlled. "Male. Is it done?" A second voice responded, slightly distorted but entirely intelligible. "They are waiting for confirmation." Silence. Then the sentence, "Move the 5. No delays. 5. Not the money. Not the ransom. Just 5. Specific. Familiar." The shorthand of 2 people who had discussed this before. Within hours, digital forensics communities transformed social media into their own crime scene. Audio analysts broke down every second of the recording. Forensic linguists published lengthy threads. Former federal agents offered detailed commentary. Podcast hosts went live through the night. And then someone made a comparison that detonated the entire conversation. A forensic linguistics specialist, a professional who studies vocal rhythm and speech patterns for a living, told an independent journalist that the vocal signature in the leaked clip showed a 78% match with the son-in-law's publicly recorded speaking patterns. 78%. I want to be honest with you about what that number means. It is not proof. It is not a conviction. It does not settle the question. But it is not nothing. And when that figure hit social media, the reaction was seismic. Split-screen videos spread everywhere. One side showing him at press conferences, tears running down his face, saying he would give anything to bring her home. The other side playing those 8 words. "Move it now. No delays." People could not unsee it. The family had no choice but to respond. 36 hours after the audio went viral, a statement was released. 3 sentences. "I believe in my husband. The truth will come out. We are devastated." And I want to linger on that last word for a second. Devastated is a word that covers an enormous amount of territory. A person can be devastated because their mother is missing. A person can be devastated because the man they married is now at the center of a federal investigation. A person can be devastated because a life they built is unraveling publicly in real time. But insiders close to the situation told journalists something that never made it into that 3-sentence statement. The lights at the estate burned all night. Law enforcement vehicles were parked outside for hours. And the man himself, the one who had appeared before cameras nearly every day since the disappearance, had not been seen publicly in 36 hours. For a man who had made himself so visible throughout this story, that silence communicated more than any statement could. Because there is a meaningful difference between a man with nothing to hide who steps back to grieve privately and a man with something to hide who steps back because his attorneys have told him to stop talking. And the people watching this case closely felt they understood which one this was. If you're still here, subscribe because cases like this only work when people stay and tell us where you're watching from. I love seeing my global family represent. Drop your country or city in the comments. Now here is where this case moves into something considerably darker. Because investigators did not simply examine what happened after Nancy vanished. They went backward. They reconstructed the 72 hours before she disappeared. Every meeting, every call, every financial transaction, every conversation anyone connected to her had in those final days. And something emerged that changed the entire frame of the investigation. 2 days before the abduction, Nancy Guthrie reportedly convened a private, closed-door meeting with her legal team. The subject of that meeting, according to leaked internal notes, was asset control. Specifically, she was reportedly preparing to suspend her son-in-law's access to a number of high-value financial accounts, pending a review. Pending a review of what? That is the question investigators keep returning to. Because when a woman of her financial standing calls her lawyers and says she wants someone's access pulled, that is not a casual decision. That does not happen over a minor disagreement. That happens when someone believes something serious is happening, something that needs to be stopped. And then a former board member, speaking anonymously, said something that halted investigators in their tracks. She believed funds were being redirected without her knowledge, without her approval, without full disclosure. And she was preparing to act on that belief, to remove him, to expose something. We may never know exactly what she had discovered, because 48 hours after that closed-door meeting with her attorneys, she was gone. Now I need to tell you about something investigators uncovered that changes the meaning of everything else in this case. It is called Project Helix. Almost nobody outside a very small inner circle had ever heard that name before this investigation surfaced it. 48 hours before Nancy disappeared, she reportedly requested access logs for an internal audit file labeled Project Helix. The organization connected to this case officially denies that such a file exists. But digital archivists who track and preserve online records claim the file was accessed using the son-in-law's own credentials, hours after Nancy made her request. She asked to see it. And hours later, someone using his login went in. What is Project Helix? Investigators say it appears to be a financial authorization framework, not a marketing initiative, not a standard operational project. A multi-tiered authorization structure, including a designation called Tier 3, which investigators describe as a financial clearance level. When federal agents raided a downtown financial firm connected to his offshore accounts, they did not leave empty-handed. They walked out carrying boxes. They walked out with computers. They walked out in total silence, not acknowledging a single question from the reporters gathered outside. And inside those seized hard drives, agents reportedly found encrypted folders directly linked to Helix Authorization Tier 3. Hold that picture in your mind alongside everything else we have walked through. A woman discovers that money may be moving without her consent. She contacts her lawyers. She attempts to access an audit file. 48 hours later, she is abducted. And the person at the center of the investigation has encrypted folders on seized computers connected to the precise project she was trying to examine. If that is what those hard drives contain, this stopped being a kidnapping story a long time ago. This is a cover-up story. And then, just when investigators believed they had a workable framework for what they were dealing with, an extended version of the audio clip appeared online. And in that extended version, there was a third voice. Not the composed male voice. Not the distorted second voice. A third, quieter, female. And what she said stopped the investigation cold. You promised this would not go this far. You promised this would not go this far. That single line reshaped everything. Because that sentence does not come from someone who is uninvolved. That does not sound like someone blindsided by events. That sounds like someone who was aware that something was being planned, who believed it would be controlled, contained, limited, who never anticipated it would reach this level. And when amateur audio analysts began comparing vocal patterns from that third voice against publicly available interviews, a host of an independent true crime podcast described what they heard as the most disturbing audio comparison in 20 years of covering these cases. The third voice bore a significant resemblance to the wife's voice from past media appearances. I want to be absolutely transparent with you here. That comparison has not been officially confirmed. Investigators have not publicly advanced that claim. This is not a conviction. This is not even a formal accusation. But the resemblance was close enough to shift the entire trajectory of public conversation, because suddenly this was not only about him. A new and far more painful question entered the room. Was she involved in what happened to her own mother? Or was she a woman who knew that something was being organized and believed she could keep it from going too far, and simply lost that control? There is an enormous difference between those two possibilities. And right now, nobody knows which one is true. While investigators worked quietly behind closed doors, the public fallout was extraordinary. Industry sources reported that board members were convening in emergency sessions. Advertisers began making inquiries. Institutional investors began stepping back. The stock price dropped 11% in a single morning session. 11%. That is not a market fluctuation. That is the financial world issuing a verdict on what it believes is happening inside this organization. One commentator said on air that this could become the most significant internal scandal in the history of modern media. A prominent talk show host posted one word publicly: performance. That word spread faster than any analysis, because it forced people to go back through every press conference, every tier, every camera appearance, and reconsider all of it with fresh eyes. Was any of it real? Then the board moved. At 9:42 in the morning, a press release was distributed. The son-in-law had been placed on temporary administrative leave. Pending review. 2 words. Temporary. Review. But those 2 words hit the financial markets like a detonation. Because here is what those 2 words quietly confirmed to everyone paying attention. Organizations do not put innocent people on administrative leave. Boards do not issue crisis communications about people they fully trust. Investors do not panic over situations where clear explanations have been provided. The board knew something, and by placing him on leave, they told the world precisely what they thought about what they knew. And then a man came forward during a live-streamed interview. A former private security contractor. His voice was unsteady. He chose his words carefully, but he spoke. He said he had installed private surveillance in that residence the previous year. And during that period, he had heard things. Arguments. Loud ones. About money. About financial control. About who held the authority to make decisions, and who was being systematically excluded. And then he said something that made the host of that interview fall completely silent. The night before she disappeared, there was shouting. And he heard Nancy Guthrie say, "If I go down, you are coming with me. If I go down, you are coming with me." Those are not the words of a woman who had no idea what was coming. Those are not the words of a future kidnapping victim going about her ordinary evening. Those are the words of a woman who understood she was in a fight. A financial fight. A high-stakes fight. A fight she was prepared to take public if she had to. She was not frightened. She was furious. And she was ready. 48 hours later, she was gone. Now I have to ask you the question that investigators are quietly asking among themselves. Was any of this ever truly about ransom? Think about what we know. The original demand came in cryptocurrency, standard for sophisticated criminal ransom operations. Hard to trace, difficult to connect to individuals, the default currency of professional criminal enterprises. But then something changed. Hours after the 2:13 a.m. phone call, the kidnappers abandoned the cryptocurrency demand entirely and switched to wire transfer instructions. Why would professional criminals change their payment methodology in the middle of an active operation? Criminal enterprises do not introduce new complexity mid-execution without a reason. They do not redirect unless something or someone prompted that redirect. Unless someone with a sophisticated understanding of how large sums move efficiently told them to switch. Unless someone who understood the financial architecture better than the criminals themselves stepped in and guided the transaction. And that is the question federal investigators reportedly began asking internally. A question that transformed this from a kidnapping investigation into something far more complicated. Was he paying the kidnappers? Or was he directing them? The difference between those 2 possibilities is the difference between a desperate man trying to protect his family and something that has no gentle name. One is panic. The other is orchestration. And based on the totality of what we have laid out, investigators appear to believe they know which one it is. Now here is a dimension of this story that most coverage has entirely overlooked, and it may ultimately be the most disturbing element of all. A cybersecurity expert who analyzed the metadata of that leaked audio file made a claim that stopped investigators cold. That clip did not originate from a criminal server. It did not come from a hacker operating outside the system. The metadata suggested it came from inside a federal evidence database, from within the investigation itself. Someone with access to that evidence, someone inside law enforcement or directly connected to the federal probe, deliberately released that recording to the public. And now a second mystery runs parallel to the first. Who leaked it and why? Were they trying to surface the truth before it could be quietly buried? Were they trying to ensure this evidence could not disappear into a sealed file? Or were they trying to ensure that a specific person took the fall, regardless of what the actual investigation determined? Because if that audio was leaked from inside the investigation, then someone within the system does not trust that system to deliver justice on its own. And that tells you something deeply unsettling about how far up this story actually reaches. In the extended version of that leaked audio, after the third voice appears, after the line about promises being broken, there is one final exchange. And when this exchange became public, it stopped the entire conversation. The third voice whispers, "What if they find out?" And the male voice responds, "They won't. She doesn't know enough." She, not they, not the investigators, not federal agents, not the FBI. She, one specific woman, a woman who apparently knew something, a woman who was getting dangerously close to knowing more, a woman who needed to be prevented from taking that knowledge any further. Was that woman Nancy Guthrie? Was she days away from discovering exactly what Project Helix authorized? Was she about to learn where that money had actually been going? Was she about to expose something so damaging that the only way to stop her was to make sure she could not speak to anyone? If that is true, this was never a kidnapping. This was a silencing. And the $5 million, the ransom demand, the press conferences, the tears in front of the cameras, all of it was a constructed story. A cover built over something far colder, far more calculated, far more deliberate than a criminal ransom operation. If that is what federal investigators are now operating under as their primary theory, then we are not near the end of this story. We are barely past its opening pages. So let me tell you where things actually stand. Federal agents have seized computers and hard drives from a financial firm connected to his offshore accounts. No public statement has been made about the contents, but a source close to the investigation told a major journalist one sentence. 5 words. This is bigger than a kidnapping. No elaboration. No context. Just 5 words that apparently sent a wave of alarm through every level connected to this situation. The man at the center of everything has not appeared publicly in over 36 hours. His legal team has issued nothing new. His social media accounts are silent. The estate where he lives has had law enforcement vehicles outside. The board is still in emergency session. Advertisers are nervous. Investors are retreating. The stock price has declined nearly 30% across 2 trading days. And somewhere in Tucson, Arizona, an 84-year-old woman is still missing. Do not let the financial complexity and the leaked audio and the corporate drama cause you to lose sight of that. At the center of all of this is a real woman. A grandmother. A mother. The woman who raised Savannah Guthrie. And she has not come home. I have covered a great many stories on this channel. Kidnappings, corporate frauds, family betrayals, investigations that went places no one anticipated. But I rarely feel the weight of a case the way I feel this one. Because beneath all of the money and the phone calls and the encrypted files and the shell companies and the board meetings and the falling stock prices, there is a family. And somewhere inside that family, if the investigators are right, someone decided that an 84-year-old woman was a problem that needed to be solved. And that person sat in front of cameras, cried real-looking tears, held their wife's hand, appealed to the public for help, while possibly having arranged the very thing they were begging for help to resolve. Federal sources are saying this investigation is accelerating. Arrests may come far sooner than the public expects. And when they do, the detail that emerges in those charges will answer every question we have worked through today. This is where I need you. If this case matters to you, if you believe Nancy Guthrie deserves the full weight of public attention on her story until she is home and until the truth is exposed, then subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell. The moment the next update breaks on this case, you will be among the first to know. Share this video with someone who follows cases like this one. Leave a comment telling me what part of this timeline concerns you most, because the audience that watches these cases closely is part of what keeps investigators accountable and keeps these stories from being quietly buried. Nancy Guthrie is still out there. This story is still moving. And this channel is not going anywhere until the truth comes all the way out. Stay with me.